Imagine a world 3,000 years ago that was as connected and as sophisticated as our own. A world not of scattered tribes, but of mighty empires. The pharaohs of Egypt, dripping in gold, commanded the wealth of nations. The great kings of the Hittites, warriors and diplomats, ruled from their mountain fortresses in Anatolia. And in Greece, the Mycenaean warlords, clad in boar-tusk helmets, built palaces of legendary size. This was the Late Bronze Age. It was a world of international trade. Tin from the distant mountains of Afghanistan traveled thousands of miles to be mixed with copper from Cyprus to forge the bronze that armed their soldiers and built their cities. It was a world of diplomacy. Kings did not only wage war. They wrote to each other on clay tablets. They called each other brother. They exchanged luxurious gifts and married each other's daughters to secure their peace. For over 300 years, this complex, glittering, and interconnected world felt eternal, invincible, the highest point of human achievement. They had no idea that they were living at the end of the world. Ominous, and that a storm was coming that would wash them all away. The Club of Great Powers. This was the world's first truly globalized system, and at its heart was a small, exclusive group of players, the Great Powers. The Pharaoh of Egypt, the great king of the Hittites, the rulers of Babylon and Assyria, and to a lesser extent, the powerful kings of Mycenaean Greece. They were the superpowers of their day, and they ran the world through a complex web of trade, diplomacy, and the constant threat of war. Their correspondence, miraculously preserved on clay tablets found in Egypt, the Amarna letters, reads like the secret communications of a modern G7 summit. They are filled with breathtaking arrogance and startling intimacy. The king of Babylon writes to the pharaoh of Egypt, complaining that the gold he received was not pure. It looked like it was mixed with silver, he protests. The Hittite king arranges a marriage for his sister with the Egyptian court, negotiating the dowry down to the last detail. They call each other brother. They promise eternal peace. And in the next letter, they threaten to burn each other's cities to the ground over a disputed border town. It was a delicate, dangerous game of power politics, and the lifeblood of this game was trade. Massive cargo ships, some carrying over 10 tons of raw materials, crisscrossed the Mediterranean. They were the container ships of their day. Tin, mined in the far-off mountains of Afghanistan, traveled overland for thousands of miles. It was then shipped to the coast of Syria, where it was loaded onto ships bound for Cyprus. There, it was mixed with pure Cypriot copper to create the bronze that gave the age its name. This bronze was everything. It was the steel of the ancient world. It made the swords for their armies, the helmets for their kings, the tools for their farmers. Without this intricate supply chain, their entire world would grind to a halt. Their palaces, their armies, their very civilization were all built on a system so complex, so interconnected, that if one single piece were to fail, the entire structure could come crashing down. They had created a beautiful, glittering world, built on a knife's edge, and they had no idea that the ground beneath them was beginning to shake. The first cracks. They had created a beautiful, glittering world, built on a knife's edge, and they had no idea that the ground beneath them was beginning to shake. The first sign of the end was not an army. It was not a king. It was something far older and far more powerful. The weather. Analysis of ancient pollen and sediment layers tells a clear and chilling story. Around 1250 BC, a severe and prolonged period of drought began to grip the eastern Mediterranean. A megadrought that may have lasted for decades. The rains stopped. The harvests failed. The great grain stores of the empires, once thought to be endless, began to empty. And the tone of the letters between kings changes. The boastful requests for gold and princesses are replaced by desperate pleas for food. A letter from a great Hittite queen to the Pharaoh of Egypt reads, "Desperate. I have no grain in my lands. It is a matter of life and death. Please send grain that we may live." And as the people starved, the ground itself began to betray them. Archaeological evidence shows that this same period was racked by a series of massive earthquakes, a so-called earthquake storm that rippled across the region. Palace walls cracked, harbors crumbled into the sea. Great cities were reduced to rubble, not by an invading army, but by the violent shaking of the earth. Famine, destruction. These are the things that break empires from within. The intricate system began to fracture. Desperate people abandoned the dying cities and turned to banditry. The trade routes, the lifeblood of the Bronze Age, became too dangerous to travel. Tin and copper stopped flowing. Internal rebellions flared up. We read of civil wars. A Hittite king writes of an enemy in my own land. So by the turn of the century, around 1200 BC, the gilded world was a shadow of its former self. It was weak. It was divided. It was starving. The club of great powers was broken. They were a wounded giant, bleeding from 1,000 cuts, completely unprepared for the final decisive blow. They had no idea that out on the horizon, beyond the edge of their known world, a storm of a different kind was gathering. A human storm. The Nameless Storm. They appear in the historical records suddenly, violently, like a storm appearing on a clear horizon. The Hittites didn't have a name for them. The Mycenaeans left no records of them at all. Only the Egyptians, the lone survivors of the coming apocalypse, gave them a title. A name that still echoes with dread. The peoples of the sea. On the great stone walls of his mortuary temple, Pharaoh Ramesses III carved his own account of the invaders. His words, written for eternity, tremble with a rare, imperial fear. No land could stand before their arms, he wrote. They came from the sea in their warships, and a fire was before them. His scribes described their confederation. A mix of peoples, the Peliset, the Checker, the Shekelesh. Names that are strange and alien to us. They were not a single nation. They were a confederation, a swarm. Men, women, and children, traveling together in sharp prowed ships and heavy ox carts. A whole civilization on the move. They were looking not just for plunder, but for a new home. And they were willing to burn the entire world to find it. But who were they? Where did they come from? This is the central mystery of the Bronze Age collapse. For over 100 years, historians and archaeologists have debated the question. Were they mercenaries from across the sea turned pirates? Were they Anatolian tribes displaced by the Great Famine and seeking new lands? Were they heroes of the Trojan War, returning to find their homes gone and turning to the sea for revenge? Or were they something else? Entirely. The truth is, we don't know for sure. In the eyes of the ancient empires, they were simply the apocalypse, a nameless, faceless storm, armed with bronze swords and a hunger for destruction. And now, this human storm, having gathered its strength in the chaotic waters of the Mediterranean, was about to make landfall. Its first target would be the heart of the mightiest empire in the Near East. The world of the Bronze Age was about to burn. The Cascade of Fire, the human storm, having gathered its strength in the chaotic seas, was about to make landfall. The first great power to face its fury was the Hittite Empire. For 400 years, they had been the mighty rivals of Egypt, an empire of iron chariots and 1,000 gods. And then, in the space of a single generation, they were gone. The excavation of their mighty capital, Hattusa, tells the story. A massive, all-consuming fire, a violent destruction. The city was not just conquered, it was annihilated, wiped from the map so completely that its very location was lost to history for 3,000 years. The destruction then cascaded south, a wildfire of collapse, moving down the coast of the Levant. The wealthy port city of Ugarit, a jewel of the Mediterranean, saw the wave coming. We have their last, desperate letters, baked hard by the very fires that destroyed the city. In one, the terrified king of Ugarit pleads for help from a neighboring kingdom, pleading, "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came. They have set fire to my country and have done evil things. Anxious, does not my father know that all my troops are stationed far away? Desperate, the country is abandoned to itself. May my father know it. The help never came. Ugarit, burned." Across the sea, in the land of Achilles and Agamemnon, the world of the Trojan war heroes was also ending. The great fortified citadels of the Mycenaean Greeks, Mycenae, with its lion gate, the palace of Pylos, the fortress of Tyrans, one by one, they too were consumed by fire. Their sophisticated palace culture vanished. Their complex writing system, Linear B, was forgotten overnight, as if it had never existed. Greece plunged into a dark age that would last for 400 years. It was a domino effect of destruction, a cascade of fire that swept across the civilized world. Great empires turned to dust. International trade ceased to exist. Literacy disappeared. An entire world order, built over centuries, collapsed in the space of a few terrible decades. Only one of the old great powers was left standing, battered, bloodied, but not yet broken. The oldest, the wealthiest, and the last of them all, Egypt. And now, the Nameless Storm, having shattered the rest of the world, was heading for the shores of the Nile. The final battle for the fate of the Bronze Age was about to begin. The long night, the final battle for the fate of the Bronze Age was about to begin. But even for the victors, it was already too late. The world they were fighting to save was already dead. The intricate web of trade that had connected their world was gone. The tin mines were silent. The copper smelters were cold. The great cargo ships rotted in their harbors. Without the constant flow of bronze, the engine of their civilization seized up. And with the collapse of the palaces came the death of knowledge. The complex art of writing, once the sacred tool of kings and scribes, became a useless skill in a world struggling for daily survival. In Greece, the Linear B script vanished completely, an entire writing system, forgotten for 400 years. Across the Near East, literacy plummeted, international correspondence ceased, the letters between kings stopped. The world fell silent. The great, populous cities became ghost towns. The survivors abandoned the monumental ruins of their ancestors and scattered into small, impoverished, isolated villages. They forgot how to build with stone. They forgot how to paint frescoes. They forgot the names of the great kings who had once ruled them. It was more than just a collapse. It was a system reset, a great forgetting, a dark age that descended upon the Eastern Mediterranean. The lights of civilization, which had burned so brightly for centuries, had been extinguished. one by one. And for the next 300 years, the world would be a darker, poorer, and smaller place. A world of petty chieftains and local squabbles. A world of myths and legends, where people told stories of a lost golden age of heroes and great kings. A world they could no longer imagine was real. But in the land of the Nile, one last light was still flickering. One final defiant kingdom, standing alone amidst the ruins of the world. Egypt. Battered, bloodied, and surrounded by enemies. The last of the great powers would now face the full fury of the storm. The survivors. The world was in ashes. The Hittite Empire, gone. The Mycenaean palaces, rubble. The great trading cities of the Levant, smoldering ruins. And now, the full, concentrated force of the sea peoples turned towards the final prize, the last great power, the land of gold and gods. Egypt. But Egypt would not fall without a fight. In its hour of greatest peril, it was led by one of its last great warrior pharaohs, Ramesses III. He saw the storm coming. On the colossal stone walls of his great temple at Medinet Habu, he recorded for eternity his preparations for the inevitable war. The first attack came by land. A horde of the sea peoples, their warriors marching alongside their families in heavy ox carts, stormed south through Syria, aiming for the rich borders of the Nile Delta. Ramesses met them with the full might of the Egyptian army, chariots, archers, and veteran infantry who had fought for generations. But the true, decisive test would come at sea. The sea peoples were masters of the ocean. Their fleets had terrorized the Mediterranean. Ramesses knew he could not defeat them in open water. So he laid a trap. He lured their massive fleet into the intricate, winding channels of the Nile Delta, a place where their superior seamanship was useless, and his own smaller, more agile ships had the advantage. The temple carvings show us the brutal chaos that followed. Archers lined the banks of the Nile, raining down arrows upon the trapped ships. Egyptian marines, on vessels equipped with grappling hooks, dragged the enemy ships close. The battle became a bloody, desperate affair of hand-to-hand combat on the crowded decks. The reliefs show Egyptian soldiers slaughtering their enemies, who are identified by their horned helmets and feathered headdresses. Ships are capsized, men are thrown overboard, to be drowned in the murky waters of the Nile. Against all odds, Egypt had won. The invasion was repelled. The sea peoples were defeated, their power broken. Ramesses III had saved his kingdom from the fate that had consumed the rest of the world. He was a hero, the savior of his civilization. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. The treasury was empty. The army was exhausted. The long war had cost Egypt its empire in Asia. It was now isolated, alone, in a broken, impoverished world. Ramesses had stopped the apocalypse at his front door, but in doing so he had exhausted the last great strength of his ancient civilization. The storm had finally passed. The world of the Bronze Age was officially over. And in the quiet, desolate aftermath, echoes of apocalypse. So in the end, what truly killed the Bronze Age? The sea peoples were not the cause. They were a symptom, a human fever born from a sick and dying world. The real killer was something far more complex, a perfect storm of catastrophes, a cascade of failures, set in motion by a changing climate. The drought led to famine. The famine led to mass migrations and internal rebellions. The rebellions shattered the delicate trade routes, and the collapse of trade brought the entire interconnected system crashing down. And this is the most chilling lesson from the dust of 3,000 years ago. Because their world, in many ways, looked a lot like ours. They had their own version of globalization, a complex web of international systems where nations depended on each other for the vital resources that fueled their societies. They had a club of elite superpowers who wrote to each other as brother, and who believed their system was too big, too advanced, and too powerful to ever truly fail. They were wrong. It forces us to look at our own glittering modern world, our own just-in-time supply chains, our own changing climate, and ask a difficult question. Are we as secure as we think we are? Or are we too living in a gilded age, blissfully unaware of the cracks forming just beneath our feet? The Bronze Age collapse is a ghost story, written on a global scale. It's a reminder that no civilization, no matter how great, is eternal, that progress is not a straight line, and that the complex systems we depend on for our very survival can be far more fragile than we can possibly imagine. The sea peoples are gone, but the forces that created them, climate change, resource scarcity, and systemic collapse, are still very much with us. The final question from this dark chapter of hidden history is not what happened to them. The final question is, could it happen again?